Yes. Um, so yeah, it's a time to the privacy talks. Thank you for the listeners. I'm very honored to invited Mr. Quentin. This time, he's a very exclusive experiences in policy making, the lawsuits in United States. So I'm very glad today. I'm very appreciated to share his thoughts to all the listeners. Thank you for Quentin coming to this privacy talks.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to make an introduction with him because he had many experiences that I want to share to the listeners. Quentin serves as the president of International Digital Accountability Council, an independent watchdog dedicated to ensuring a fair and trustworthy digital and app marketplace for consumers worldwide through monitoring, investigation, education, and collaboration with platform and developers. Quentin is a leader in consumer privacy protections efforts while supporting innovation, economies, and job creations. During the Obama administrations, Quentin served as a senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Deputy General Counsel for Strategic Initiatives at the U.S. Department of Commerce. In those positions, Palfrey played a leading role in efforts to develop baseline consumer privacy legislations centered on the idea of a consumer privacy bills of rights. He served as the lead White House staffer in connection with passage of the American Invents Act, the launch of the Patents for Humanity Initiative, and the relaunch of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. Prior to his time in the Obama administration, Palfrey served as the first chief of the healthcare division in the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, where he oversaw multi-million-dollar litigation and investigations against insurance and pharmaceutical companies, and played a key role in decisions related to implementation of Massachusetts landmark healthcare reform law. Palfrey has also led several nonprofit organizations, including J-PAL, North America, MIT's Poverty Lab, where he worked to improve the efficacy of social services in the area of healthcare, economic mobility, housing and education, and the global access in actions, a project of Brackman Crane Center for Internet Society at Harvard University that seeks to improve the access of life-saving medicines for the world's poorest population, to name a few. So yeah, it's very great to welcome Quentin to these interviews. Thank you for having.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. So I want to move to the today's privacy talk topics. First topic is about your experience at the J-PAL. I think I had some watched your presentation through the YouTube, so that's gonna be a very great approach from humanity actions. So I'm wondering how did you get to start these things, and what you are motivated to work for that activities?
Thanks so much for asking, Kohei. When I was in the White House, I worked in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And one of the key elements of that is to try to make sure that we are using data and evidence to inform policymaking. And one of my positions after I left the Obama White House was, as you mentioned, to be the executive director of J-PAL North America, which is the poverty lab at MIT. And this is a really innovative program. The founders of the program received the Nobel Prize for Economics for their approach. And essentially the idea is to use scientific and rigorous studies to evaluate the effectiveness of social programs. So in some cases, you can apply exactly the same kinds of methods that are familiar from the scientific method, and apply them to social programs and determine what works and what doesn't. And particularly with respect to poverty programs, you're almost always talking about scarce resources, where a government or a philanthropy has a small amount of resources and wants to make sure that those resources are actually helping disadvantaged populations. And in sort of prior ways of thinking about philanthropy, there wasn't a rigorous assessment of whether the social programming was working. So the idea behind the Poverty Action Lab is that we should look rigorously and use the same kinds of tools that we use in other fields of science to determine which of these programs are effective. And then that can help the philanthropists or governments that are trying to build these programs or scale these programs to focus on the things that are actually demonstrably effective.
I see that. Yeah, that's a very great approach. In particular, like we need to take equal actions for the people. Sometimes it's in the minorities, but they need to be inclusive to be involved in the decision makings. Through the presentation, you sometimes the lesson about the evidence. I think the evidence is a very important part to making the decisions. But the problem is that sometimes the evidence is coming from the specific bias. If your community is in serious, like your community is the distance from the people who needs special helps. So from your perspective, so how we can making a great evidence to be inclusive societies. So what the kind of approach is better for the society?
So one of the best tools that you can use is the tool of randomization. So when you're studying the way that a drug works or doesn't work, we're used to having a placebo-controlled trial. So you take a statistically representative group, you flip a coin and you give some of the people a placebo and you give some of the people the medicine. And then you can compare what happens if you receive a placebo versus the medicine. The same kind of a concept works sometimes with social programming. So let's imagine that you have a wait list for a program. Sometimes when you're trying to decide who gets off of that wait list, you say, well, maybe it's just the first person to come. Or maybe it's somebody's nephew gets the thing. But if you can have the discipline to use randomization to determine who gets something that you can't give to everybody, then you can study what happens when you give the social program to a person and what happens if they don't get access to that. If you have the study designed in the right way and you have enough people, that's called statistical power, then you can actually make a comparison and then you can learn whether your program is succeeding according to those metrics. And if it is, then maybe you can make an argument that more resources should be devoted to that kind of a social service program, that kind of an education program, that kind of a healthcare program. And if it's not working, according to those metrics, then that's helpful to know as well, right? Then maybe you want to test something else or you want to try something else because we don't want to be spending those scarce resources on things that are not actually succeeding in accomplishing their objectives.
I see. So you have been tried to the inclusive approach, but the problem is we have many gaps, especially like economic gaps. In particular, these pandemic situations. So in America is also really suffering those kind of the very big issues at this moment. So what gonna be the best approach to be more inclusive the decision making, in particular the policy makings or legal processes? We sometimes behind the people who is not addressing their direct to the emotional approach. So what do you think the best way in this very critical times?
I think that one problem is that our democracy, the US democracy, is under attack. There are anti-democratic forces that have been on the rise in many parts of the world. But in the United States, we have an election system that is not working very well. We have a president of the United States that has made a strategic decision to make it harder for certain populations to register and vote and have their votes count. We are facing a pandemic, which has created a lot of challenges in terms of the election. We have Russian adversaries who are trying to undermine the legitimacy of our election. So there are a lot of challenges in terms of making sure that we have a free and fair and inclusive democratic process. The Trump administration has also been trying to undermine the census, which gives us a fair count of who is in various parts of the population. And that plays a big role in making sure that we allocate resources to people who need them the most. The Republicans for many years have been doing something called gerrymandering, which is you take control of the state legislatures and then you redraw the lines of the legislative districts to hold on to power. We have a campaign finance system that rewards large donors and allows them to distort the political process. And we have a court system that has been stacked recently by a Senate Majority Leader who blocks the Democratic nominees and has let through the Republican nominees. So we have a lot of distortions in our democratic system. And one of the things that I think that we need to prioritize over the next couple of years is trying to take back that democratic system and make it a fairer system. We also have challenges in terms of very significant socioeconomic inequality and racial inequality in our economy. So we have a widening gap between the rich and the poor. And so in many of the sort of parts of the economy, you see policy decisions that reward large shareholders, that reward the top 1% or the top tenth of 1%. And the majority of people, have to work very hard just to keep up with how their parents did. So we've got very significant differences there and challenges there. And then we have some very significant racial disparities across a series of different aspects of our society. Our criminal justice system is has deep inequalities. Our policing system is in need of serious reform. Our education system has massive inequality. So there's a lot that we need to do across a series of different levels, whether that's political or economic or social, to make our society fairer. And a lot of those reforms are necessary to have good results for folks.
I understand. Yeah, it's great to hear from that. I used to work in the political things before. That's a very challenging for us to make a great decision to be inclusive, especially the lot of those people is not shouting anything. It's not be the participant in the voting decisions. So that's a kind of the great approach. So I would like to move to the next topics. You have been working in the privacy space as well. I think in the United States has very it's a kind of invasive since the Patriot Act is in the early of the 2000s. Since the lot of action is coming against of privacy invasions. So I'm wondering, you have published in 2013 in the White House. I saw that those articles is a very innovative approach to gain the privacy for the democratic things. So what has been changed since you published in the article in the United States regarding the privacy laws of federal approach?
Well, so of course the internet and the sort of digital world changes very rapidly, and one of the design features that has made it so successful is that it's open, and it's been a less regulated environment than some of the other parts of our economy, and in some ways that has helped it to grow over the course of the last few decades to transform huge aspects of our lives, whether that's our economy or our social lives or educational or health systems. But regulation or the laws around internet governance have had a lot of trouble keeping up with the challenges of what is now a multi-trillion-dollar sector of the worldwide economy. It's just very hard for governance to keep up with the changes. So at the moment, we have a patchwork of rules across the world and across the United States that depends very much on what kind of data you're talking about, where you live, and who is enforcing the rules. And this has a lot of problems. One of them is that from a business perspective, it's very hard to know what rules you need to follow. And often you need to follow different rules if you're in Europe or if you're in Japan than if you're in the United States. And even within the United States, we now have certain rules in California, other rules in other parts of the country. And so we in the Obama administration were strong proponents of federal baseline privacy legislation that would help set fair rules of the road. And we had a notion that that should be based on the Fair Information Privacy Principles, which we generally referred to as a Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights approach. But we thought that there ought to be baseline privacy principles and that there ought to be engagement by what we called a multi-stakeholder set of approaches, which brought in some of the commercial actors, some of the members of civil society, some of the relevant government actors to the process of trying to set fair rules, and would be a little bit more nimble than traditional rulemaking processes, but still have robust accountability. And in the Obama administration, we did propose a piece of legislation with some Democratic allies in the Senate, but it wasn't able to get over the finish line. And since that time, there have been some very significant developments. So in Europe, they passed the GDPR. In California and a number of other states have moved forward with state legislation. There has been significant litigation and law enforcement actions. And I think that there's the beginnings of a bipartisan consensus that we do need to revisit the notion of a baseline privacy legislative approach. It's my hope that if Biden and Harris are successful in a couple of weeks, that we can restart a process of trying to move something forward on Capitol Hill that would set baseline privacy rules and rationalize the system between the federal level and state protections while making sure that we're protecting consumers. And then, I would also like to see international harmonization. So I think it's really important that there be some alignment between the set of expectations that companies and other publishers face when they're working internationally, because at the moment, most of the most important internet products are things that can be accessed all over the world, and so having different inconsistent regulatory or legislative regimes creates a real set of obstacles. But the main piece of this is that there's a lack of trust, that we need users to feel comfortable that their rights are going to be respected, that they're going to be treated fairly. when they are, engaging on the internet, because this is touching on so many of the most important pieces of our lives, our
Mm-hmm.
healthcare data, as we sort of roll out all these coronavirus tracking apps to help contain the pandemic. We're turning over very sensitive healthcare data, as we're trying to figure out how to educate our children. More and more, we're turning to personalized learning and digital tools. That's certainly been the case that it's accelerated a lot during the pandemic. Well, if your children are going to spend more of their time online, if more of their data is going to be collected to help teach them, that could be transformative to teaching and learning, and could have really beneficial aspects to our society. But we need to make sure that our children are safe, that their data is treated respectfully. Recently, we looked very closely at some fertility apps. So people trying to get pregnant are sharing intimate details about themselves with commercial actors in order to help with something that's very important in their lives. We need to make sure that that's protected as well. So I think that we've got a lot of work to do, but it's a very exciting space.
Indeed. Um, from your response, I guess the trust is the key part of the elements to make an accountable accessing into democratic things. So what the government is required to make a trust? I think sometimes it's the government is incoherent in the sense that some people is against the government decision. So what kind of the trust making is the very good actions from the government perspective in the sense.
Yeah, so I think that the key to building trust online is to have a three-part approach. The first is that there need to be fair rules, right? We need to make sure that they're clear rules that everybody understands and that are that apply broadly across the ecosystem. That may be a little different in different sectors, but you want to have clear rules. The second thing that you want is you want to educate people who are supposed to follow those rules on what they are. So this is developer education, education of people in the platforms, and maybe certification, but you need to make sure that once you've established some clear rules, people know what they are. And then you need accountability. You need to make sure that when people don't play by the rules, they're held to account. And so you need accountability entities. Some of those accountability entities can be government. We're used to government law enforcement agencies punishing people for bad behavior. You can have fines, you can have injunctions or court cases, and that's really important, both to make sure we protect consumers and also to send a signal and deter bad behavior. But I think it's also really important to have nonprofit organizations that help to build accountability in things that don't necessarily need to be punished. One of the things that we've found in our work at the International Digital Accountability Council is that some of the greatest risks and harms to consumers actually happen earlier in the life cycle of some of these products and can be solved better by getting to them early before they actually harm consumers, before they become major problems. And so sometimes tapping developers on the shoulder and telling them, look, you're doing this wrong, and heading it off at the pass, or working with platforms like a Google or a Facebook or a Apple or a Microsoft, and trying to use their tools to make sure that people follow their terms of service, and then sometimes working with law enforcement or with the media to inform people of the worst violations. But I think it's important to have accountability that is nimble and that that works across this kind of sliding scale.
Yeah, thank you. Since you had started the International Digital Accountability Council, IDAC, I guess those are very new approach of the accountability explanations. I think it's not the problem of one single nations. Of course, we started in new privacy protections in Europe. As you mentioned, in California, has a bunch of the people is going up these dialogues. So what kind of the collaboration internationally through those kind of the accountability approach? I think there is some Watchdogs is working on the parts. This is the reason why I established my new activities, the Privacy by Design Lab, which is the kind of the educations. They also, we try to create the new things regarding the privacy cultures in this market, the Japan. So what kind of the way is the best to work on the international collaborations from your perspective?
Yeah, so congratulations on what you're doing. I agree with you entirely that we need to be proactive about teaching good privacy practices, privacy by design, data minimization, developer education. Those are all really important pieces of these things. You know, preventing a problem is always better than curing it. And in some ways, when you see a flashy law enforcement case or a major news article, that's a little bit of a failure mode, right? It means that something has come to the point where it's actually harmed consumers and caused a risk and undermined trust. And so we do have to get ahead of those problems. As you say, this is very much an international issue. And as we look at some of these challenges, I think that we need to force ourselves to look more broadly than individual nations and try to look across the world. I also think that in many cases, these are cross-platform challenges. So certainly there are challenges that are unique to Facebook or Google or Twitter or Apple. But in a lot of instances, if you really want to make accountability work, you have to look across platform at the whole ecosystem. You have to look at the economics behind data collection, understand the advertising environment, the you know, the way that analytics work, the way that data brokers work, the way that you know, some of the monetization you know, plans work for some of these companies. So you have to understand the way that the ecosystem sort of fits together. And of course, you know, the way that we've set up the internet, you know, you want people to be able to make money online if they're playing by the rules and if they're protecting consumers. This is a giant engine of economic growth. And so I don't think that the rights of users and the rights of consumers are sort of intrinsically at odds with the economic development possibilities and the cultural possibilities. And I think the most important piece about building trust is that building trust enables you to accomplish the important public policy objectives. So for example, one of the first initiatives that we launched through the International Digital Accountability Council was to look at coronavirus apps and telemedicine and quarantine enforcement, symptom trackers, as a number of governments and their partners were trying to build out these apps to contain the pandemic. And of course, we want that to succeed, right? The way that you can implement these digitally enabled public health measures is that you need broad adoption in the public. And so that requires trust. So part of what you're trying to do by identifying some of the risks and the harms and trying to work with actors to make the ecosystem more trustworthy is actually to make the thing work well. I'll give you another example, which is in the distance learning environment. You know, we actually want kids to be able to take advantage of the tremendous transformative possibilities of technologically, you know, enabled personalized learning. And if teachers and parents and school systems don't trust the way that children's information is going to be treated, they're not going to use these new tools And that's a real shame, right? And that's a bad outcome for our educational system or for our children. But trust is essential to accomplishing that important objective. So I think it's important for us both to point out these risks and these harms and try and figure out how to resolve them, and also understand that in a lot of instances, we're trying to enable the accomplishment of the broader set of initiatives, as opposed to say, stop, don't do it, shut everything down. And so I think the answer to that problem, how you do both, is trust, is making the system trustworthy, putting in place good rules, training people on those rules, enforcing those rules.
I understand. Yeah, trust is the key elements to work together, regardless of the country's the regional actions. I guess we are becoming a more international developments through the internet has evolved. The area of the 1998, there was the times that we need to cooperate. We need to more democratic internet world, the society. So that could be the reason why we have to cooperate together. So I'm very excited to have a discussion with you, but the time has come. So please give a message to the listeners. I'm very honored to talk with you today, but I'm very happy to share your message to everybody who sees this interview as well.
Thank you. Well, it's been such a pleasure talking with you, and would love to work with you and your listeners as we work together to take on some of these challenges, internationally, as a community of people who want to embrace the transformative possibilities of the digital world. So I'm very excited to continue to work with you on that. We are at, so we're the International Digital Accountability Council. You can find us online at digitalwatchdog.org, and would love to stay in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great honor to be invited this moment, and we try to keep updates in each other's for the best societies, the inclusive society in the futures. Yeah, this time just thank you for joining us today's Quentin. So yeah, great to keep updates with each other's.
Thank you very much. It's very nice talking with you.
Thank you.